Hi everyone! Season 10 works a little bit differently than other seasons. Not just because of the chaos armors that really shake up how we make our builds and what we will play and how so, but also because there were some other kind of game-wide changes that I want to dive into a little bit in this video. Mostly Paragon changes. So we have seen a lot of buffs to Paragons here. So you see, for example, the Rogue changes right now. Literally every single Paragon node here got an upgrade and not just a small one. In some cases they were doubled or so. And you see here 30% now is 50%, 30% to 50%, 30% to 50%, and so on. So this is an increase of 66% over the previous value here for most of these Paragon nodes that, for example, the Rogue has. And we have seen other similar changes in past seasons for other classes. So it seems like Blizzard is generally taking those legendary Paragon nodes to just elevate a class across the board a little bit, where they have done this with Sorcs in the past when they were a little bit undertuned, and now they've done this with the Rogues when they were a bit undertuned. And it's just the traditional power creep that we would expect over time, I guess. So it is like a relatively easy way to just make sure that everything on a certain class gets better, but it also actually changes how we approach making a build and especially how we progress our build. And this is mostly what I want to get into, because at this point we have kind of done a full round through all of the classes with similar legendary Paragon node buffs. And every class suddenly has these kind of really high powered Paragon nodes. Spiritborn also got these kind of upgrades here. You see basically everything got doubled as well on the Spiritborn. And they now have Paragon nodes that give you 60% damage on average or something like that in most of their builds. So it is pretty cracked, and we have similar power on other classes as well, because there were a lot of a lot of cleanup of very old and undertuned stuff, but also just pure power creep, and this actually shifts a little bit how you want to make your character. And the same is true for all of the classes actually. So all of the classes have these really high power Paragon nodes these days. Maybe the number is not exactly the same, so instead of 60% we have 40% and then the 10 essence, so you get another small benefit there. Or you have the 30% here and the 50% damage reduction on a Necro Send of Death board, for example. But the overall picture is pretty similar. Each Paragon node, where in the past this was maybe somewhere in the range of a 15% increase or so, maybe 20 was the better nodes. Now all of that is at least doubled or even tripled. And this means that these legendary Paragon nodes just overall have gained a lot of value compared to other forms of progressing your character. And I'm going to give you an example of what this actually means in practice. So I have my Ravens build here. I just recorded a guide for this. But, well, I do have a Paragon 200 setup here. And typically Paragon 200 is very fast to reach. And this is kind of the standard setup. You have all 5 boards, you have all 5 glyphs. You have all of the 4 legendary Paragon nodes and kind of the most important rare nodes. So this is kind of the typical Paragon 200 setup for any class or any build. Basically, this is kind of you rush through the board to try to pick up the most important stuff, which obviously means the legendary Paragon nodes. But you can actually do something else here, which is that you kind of just ignore glyphs for the most part and only rush legendary Paragon nodes. Because the thing is that as you progress, and with the very high speed of progression that we have, especially in Season 10, for example, with accelerated power gains from Chaos armors, the Chaos perks are very strong as well for many builds. So in general, we kind of get catapulted into the higher torments pretty early, and we can accelerate that even faster with just, for example, rushing the legendary Paragon nodes and kind of leaving out other stuff that is not that impactful. Because you don't really have the time to level your glyphs to kind of keep up with the power gains that you get from other sources in your Paragons. If you start out Season 10, you're definitely going to notice that progression is way faster than normal, and your glyphs going to be very underleveled compared to what you can achieve by just rushing those nodes. The typical glyph at level 100 fully maxed out is somewhere in the range of a 30 to maybe 40% buff if it's a really good glyph. So it kind of competes with what these nodes can do, but this means that you have to max out your glyph first, which is pretty easy to do if you invest enough time. But especially for a day 1, day 2 kind of scenario or so, or for your first week, if you're playing a bit more casually and at a slower pace, your glyphs will just kind of lag behind a lot. Even if you go to Torrent 4 and then you start leveling your glyphs, you'll have to do like a dozen runs to kind of get to like the legendary glyph status. And even then there's 50 more levels to get more power from a glyph every time. So the thing is that if you are willing to invest a little bit more effort in your Paragon boards, you could actually make setups where you just kind of like leave out this stuff and only go for legendary nodes, and by like Paragon 100 something maybe, you will probably have all of these already unlocked, and you just kind of leave out everything else. So I'm going to show you this example here of what I mean in practice. So this is a Paragon setup here with 112 points spent. We are Paragon 84. And we can have all 4 Paragon legendary nodes already active at this point, leaving out everything else. Now the thing is that this is obviously a bit scuffed, because you will have nothing else. You will have basically no damage reduction, you have no resistances or armor, and well, you are also potentially lacking some relatively important glyph effects that might matter for your build. For example, thinking about the Spiritborn with the Wildfire glyph, that is actually more of like a utility effect of the cooldown reduction that is pretty important for some setups, where most other builds though have just like typical, you know, either damage or damage reduction glyphs, and they don't really do anything special outside of that. But in some cases it might matter. But you kind of get the idea of what I meant here. So we have all of the boards, and if you compare it, well, I just chose the same boards in the same order here, and I rotated them a little bit. But basically you could rush to this in no time at all after hitting max level and have all the legendary Paragon nodes. But it is important to keep in mind, you are suffering a lot if you do this from like especially lack of armor and lack of resistances. In Season 10 in particular, Chaos Armors means you have many uniques equipped, and most of them usually don't come with armor or resistances. So you kind of have to squeeze this in wherever you can. You have to do like a % armor roll on the neck, probably % armor tempo on the neck as well. And then you have to like try to get the you know, big diamonds in your jewelry as soon as possible, and then probably roll resistances on every piece that can, basically like both rings and potentially the amulet as well. But technically it is possible to make these kind of setups and supercharge your like leveling and endgame progression to go straight to like Torment 3, Torment 4 as soon as possible, because you get so much power from those legendary nodes. So generally I would say this is probably something for the more advanced players, and especially on softcore, because yeah, you will probably struggle a lot. You know, going to Torment 4 you get a 100 res penalty, a 1000 armor penalty. It is kind of tough to survive when you have also just generally a very low quality gear, and you're not even res capped or something like that. But we also have some other stuff going. Like for example, we have the Brawn over Brains thing here. So if you're playing an overpower build, maybe on Barb or on Druid or something like that, suddenly you actually need less armor and you need less resistances to cap out. So this, for example, makes it much easier to hit those targets and still be decently tanky, because you get this plus 200% life bonus here on top. Or if we're talking about Sorcs, for example, Sorcs have like a lot of built-in resistances thanks to their skill tree with the potent warding passive, and they're an int class, so they get more resistances than others. And they also is generally tanky and fast, and they have a lot of CC. So it is definitely quite doable to like go into Torment 4 with like a pretty like, you know, weak like defensive setup basically, and still be okay. Especially for the Sorcs with the mana shield, I expect this to be actually a very powerful tool to stay alive. So instead of like trying to rely on your life and then maybe like something like ice armor barriers, you have this, and you probably use like something like flame shields, for example, in order to make sure that you also get this mana regen going all the time. But I do expect a lot of Sorc builds to run mana shield, and this could actually be a good solution here to just get very tanky very early on. The Barbs also have their shouts going for them, so if you are playing basically any Barb build almost, you can do Deafening Chorus here, where your shouts are permanently active and with increased effect. Now I think there was like something off here with the this effect not really working properly for Challenging Shout, but at the very least you will have Challenging Shout going with lots of damage reduction. Barbs also have, for example, these damage reduction passives there. And then you also get the shout passes here, where you heal all the time. So we have the raid leader, for example, here, and we also have the guttural yell for the damage reduction. But you just have 2 or 3 shouts active, one of them challenging shout, and you get healing all the time. So this is also a way to get pretty tanky on the Barb this season, while progressing through the torment levels, even if you're not res or armor capped. For the druids, it will depend a little bit on the build that you're playing, but for example, the bear builds, we have Polarize again. That is extremely powerful. There's other stuff as well, like Earth Spike, for example. That's also a bear build. So a bunch of stuff where you can get lots of defenses. You have all these like shape-shifting passives, the 45 passives, defensive posture, and here we have heightened senses. We have the Iron Fur and the Mending. Plus, we have the Spirit Boon, so especially here, 30% life. This is really powerful. If you're shapeshifting, you can get lots of healing here. So there are ways to, for example, make Druids also very tanky, depending on the setup a little bit, and also go into the higher torments pretty early on with just mostly a few Paragon nodes and a few of the key items. Necros also have an interesting option here. They can actually sacrifice their minions here, so depending on which one you choose here, the defenders give you 25 all res as well. So this is actually a very good early game tool in order to cap out resistances, for example, together with, for example, the extra sacrifice bonuses here. The Memento Mori, there's also a aspect for extra sacrifice bonuses. You can get something like 50 plus all res or so. So this alone can basically cover you entirely as long as you're not playing a minion Necro. And this will help you a lot. And that's also the golem you can sacrifice here. The blood golem gives you also extra life. So if you have the power anyway, then you just do that and it will be very defensive. Plus one note here is that we can also roll a shield with armor. So usually shields is not really in a high fashion these days, but it can roll armor as well. So this could be kind of like the missing piece in order to cap out or so, in order to get more tankiness. And you also have the block chance on that and so on. And we also have stuff like the passive here to get barrier, necrotic fortitude. So if you invest into lucky hits, so some builds on Necro have a lot of lucky hits, for example, together with like blighted corpse explosion or something like that, just like as an extra lucky hit tool, or maybe you throw in a Fist of Fate or something like that. Especially as a Chaos Armor, you might find one of those and just slap it in there. And then you can proc this a lot and get a lot of barrier. For the Spiritborn, it will be a bit tough to get a lot of defense because Spiritborn is generally the squishiest class, but well, the prime leveling build and progression build is Evade. And Evade has the advantage that you generally are really mobile and you just kind of blast everything almost off screen while you go. And on top of that, you can have stuff like a Mirage here. So you can get pretty close to 100% dodge at least by just having 3 points in that. And then whatever base dodge you get plus counter attack, you can press that to guarantee the 100% dodge, or just have it passively together with the Mirage, get something like 70, 80, 90% dodge chance. So almost nothing will ever hit you while you're evading, or you press this and you're gonna be generally okay. But you will have to be a bit careful with stuff like ground pools and certain things are not dodgeable. So that's kind of important here. But also a lot of Spiritborn builds will run something like Hesha Ekizungi. And once you get that item and you have a bit of like cooldown reduction and stuff for your Gorilla ult, you're gonna run the Protector. And Protector is an absolute beast when it comes to making you tanky. It gives you lots of barrier every 1.5 seconds and reduces the damage done by enemies inside. So this is insane, and this is definitely elevating the Spiritborn survivability as well. And for the rogues, you can definitely get away with a pretty scuffed defensive setup just thanks to Dark Shroud. This is kind of like the main defensive tool that the rogues have. So you maybe want to invest a bit more points into that early game. You can also go, for example, for the healing here on the Subverting Dark Shroud. Most of the time you end up going for the crit in late game. But for example, early game progression, this could be a very useful tool. This is a lot of healing that you just get. Dark Shrouds can be removed, I think, once every 1.5 seconds. So if you're like under constant assault, you actually get a ton of healing there. And they also have stuff like Rugged, for example, to get damage over time reduction, because Dark Shroud only protects you against hits. This is kind of important. And you also have the option to just like chuck health potions non-stop, thanks to unstable elixirs. You can even combine this if you get something like a Temerity, you can get big barriers. Or you can do just a normal pants and do something like Siphoned Victuals to just drop insane amounts of health potions and you just chuck them non-stop. So there's ways to do that as well on Rogue. So I just kind of want to get this out here because it's a bit of like a new strat, at least for some classes, thanks to those like latest patch notes where they really buffed everything. And now we basically have every single class in this kind of scenario where it is certainly an option to do exactly what I described here with like, rushing the legendary nodes instead of like kind of building it out completely. Usually you pick up the glyphs and the legendary nodes and maybe a few of the important clusters on the way, and then just kind of move on to the next board. So you kind of go, this board, this board, this board, and then, you get more levels. Then you just fill it out a bit more and you get more levels, you fill it out a bit more and that's it. But, well, you can do this here as well, and then basically do a respec. In some cases, you can even do like, some other combinations of boards, for example. So if you see here, there's like a really long path from the Untamed. I need like, 3, 5, 8, there's like 11 nodes here to the exit. But in other cases, it might be like only 8 nodes or something, like here, this is like a shorter path, for example, because you have to path all the way over here. So you could think about, for example, putting the boards in a different order and then pathing out on 2 sides or something like that. That depends a little bit on the layout of the board here. But most of the time, it is relatively standardized with how many points you need, plus minus a little bit. And you can kind of just like rotate them so that you have the shortest path and, well, worst case, respec later. But again, I want to highlight that this is something of a bit more of an advanced strategy because you need to be able to survive. You need to be able to pivot with your setup a little bit, make sure you get all of the armor and resistances and stuff anyway in order to actually take hits when you go into the higher torments. And from my experience making a lot of guides in the last seasons when we had a very high power level and people just kind of get catapulted into Torment 4 and easily, they tend to have a bit of a struggle with that. So there's not really that much I can really help with this, besides telling you need to cap your stuff and, you know, be careful basically. But it is what it is. Just wanted to kind of get this strategy out there. I'm not going to put this directly into a guide, but it is an option. And especially if you are willing to respec, then you can get even more power, especially for the first hours, the first day in a season or something like that. And then, you know, you can unspec this whole thing here. Ding, 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 right? And then when you're like Paragon 150 or 200 or something, you just go back to what the guide originally says. And that's about it here for this video. So hope you enjoyed this. I wish you good luck in Season 10. I'm definitely going to be excited to blast like a lot of stuff, and we'll see what I will do. Depending on, you know, which build I will choose. I will be playing hardcore, of course. So it might be a bit scary to do something like this strategy. But let's see what we'll come up with and what I will choose. For now, this is what I got here. Stay tuned for more uploads, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.